Hi, I'm Jose Antonio Vargas, one of our country's 11 million undocumented immigrants who call America home. I'm privileged to be here today with you today. Welcome to the White House Fireside Hangout. This is another in a series of conversations with senior White House officials taking place on the social network Google+. On Tuesday, President Obama delivered a speech in Las Vegas where he outlined his proposal for immigration reform. Immigrants like me and our allies are looking forward to President Obama making history by not only granting earned citizenship to 11 million new Americans, but also by putting a stop to deportations and the separation of families. Today, we'll be discussing some of the specifics of the president's plans with one of his most senior advisors, Cecilia Muñoz, director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. Cecilia, thank you for joining us and welcome to Google Plus.
Thank you so much, Jose. Thanks to everybody who's joining us. I'm really excited to be part of this. Really excited that the immigration debate is getting going. I think we all understand that we have a badly broken immigration system. The president is deeply, deeply committed to fixing it. And if you heard his remarks on Tuesday, you heard him say that this is a debate which should be getting started now. He put forward detailed principles on what he'd like to see get done in this debate. And most importantly, he pointed to the fact that there is a bipartisan agreement that's gotten started in the Senate. He's eager to see that turned into legislation so that we can get this done. His focus is on getting to a result because the system has been broken for too long. And that's bad for our country in all kinds of ways. He laid out a strong economic case for immigration reform and a strong moral case for immigration reform. And I guess if we've learned anything over the last 4 years in the administration, it's that we are most able, and the president is most able, to get his most important priorities done when people across the country are engaged, when people are lifting up their voices, telling their stories, making this as vibrant and real and personal a debate as possible. So that's in particular why I'm so excited to be part of this today, and so excited and grateful to the folks who are participating. Looking forward to a great conversation. We really need your voices in this debate to get this done well and to get it done soon. So let's have a conversation.
Great. Underscoring the complexity and the depth of this issue and the need for broad reform are participants from various sectors of society here. We have Cristina Jimenez, the managing director of United We Dream. Say hi, Cristina.
Hi, everyone.
We have Shervin Pishevar, the managing director of Menlo Ventures and the co-founder of Startup Visa.
Hey, everyone.
We have America Ferrera, actress and co-chair of the Voto Latinos I'm Ready for Immigration Reform campaign.
Hi, thank you, Cecilia and Jose, for having me.
And we have Jim Wallis, president and CEO of Sojourners.
Blessing to be with you all today.
A programming note, by the way, none of the questions that will be asked by our four participants here have been seen or shared with Cecilia. So I'm actually going to go to Cristina first because I know she has a really important question about undocumented immigrants and their families. Go ahead, Cristina.
Thank you, Jose, and thanks to the White House and Cecilia and all of you for inviting us to be part of this conversation. United We Dream is the largest immigrant youth-led network, so my questions are going to be reflective of what dreamers, immigrant youth, and our families really care about when it comes to this debate. My first question is, there's a lot of fear in our communities about the Department of Homeland Security's extremely aggressive deportation strategy. It is tearing our families apart. Just recently, United We Dream was working on the deportation cases of 2 families, one in Arizona and one in Texas, just this week. And so my question is really getting at this issue. What will President Obama do to ensure that no one more family is divided by deportations, particularly given that people being deported at the moment are often part of mixed status families where at least one or more people within the family are U.S. citizens? And is the president aware that many of the people being deported right now are the same people that he wants to put on a path to citizenship?
Cristina, thanks a lot for your question, and thanks especially for your leadership of the United We Dream Network. It's good to see your face and hear your voice, and it's so important that you all are so engaged in this debate. Thank you for everything you're doing. It's a great question. To answer the second part of your question, the president is absolutely aware that one of the terrible costs of the broken immigration system that we have now is that families get separated. And the most important thing, to answer the first part of your question, that he can do is make sure that we get the immigration reform debate, that we get the Congress to act as quickly and expeditiously and effectively as possible. The solution for these families, the solution for the country to this problem is legislative action. And this is, as he said, this is a priority for him. As he said in interviews yesterday, he's giving it a shot. That's certainly his marching orders to his team. But we need everybody else in the country to be with us in getting this job done. The most effective way to lift the shadow of immigration enforcement from the folks who live in the center of it is to get an immigration reform done and to get people on a path to citizenship, which is a very, very important part of the principles that the president put forward on Tuesday.
Cecilia, as a follow-up to that question, as we're having this debate right now, what can be done by the administration to make sure that low priority cases, people who aren't criminals,
Right,
are the ones getting deported and targeted? What can be done by the administration right now?
So this is something that the Department of Homeland Security has been working on in a series of steps, really since Secretary Napolitano joined the administration. Right, so they started by defining what constitutes a high priority and a low priority. They, for the first time, put forward a strategy for the 11 million people who are living and working in this country without their papers. The old way of doing this used to be that they were all the same, and DHS's job given to them by the Congress is to go after everybody who's deportable, and that's 11 million people. So they started naming what their priorities were: people convicted of serious crimes, people who are repeat entrants who were previously deported, people who are recent entrants. And then they went about changing their infrastructure so that the folks who are actually in removal proceedings reflect those priorities. One of the most important steps that DHS took to make sure that they're placing their resources on the biggest priorities and not on folks who are low priorities is deferred action. Right, DACA, this process, deferred action for childhood arrivals, that's affecting a big part of the potentially DREAM Act eligible population. So DHS is taking administrative steps. Those are important steps, and they continue to refine and revise their policies as they learn about the impacts and whether or not it's doing what they intended for it to do. But at the end of the day, the solution to the issue of deportations and the challenge of immigration enforcement is to have an immigration law that actually functions, that actually works, that's actually sensible. And we got to keep our eye on that ball, because that's how we're going to get the job done.
Well, this is my last follow-up on this, just because, as you can imagine, I've had dozens of people email me questions about the fact that the president has deported more than about 1.5 million people now in the past 4 years, which is a record.
Right.
How does the president feel about that? You know, especially because what happens when we reach 2 million people, 2 million immigrants?
So the government's job is to do what Congress tells it to do. Congress, under the immigration laws that we've got now, Congress requires us to remove people who are removable and gives DHS, frankly, a whole lot of resources to do that job. DHS's job is to make sure they make the best possible decisions on how they use those resources. But at the end of the day, we all understand we are enforcing and implementing a system which is broken. And our primary job here is to fix it. That requires the Congress of the United States. That's something we've been trying to get Congress to do now for 4 years. And our moment has come. There is now bipartisanship towards getting this done. We have to drive it home and make sure we get to an outcome.
Okay, I'm going to move over to Shervin here, because, you know, Silicon Valley and the tech community is so key to this conversation as well, just to make sure that, you know, our economy and that kind of the entrepreneurial spirit of this country keeps moving. Go ahead, Shervin.
Cecilia, it's an honor. Jose, thank you so much. I'm sitting here right now in San Francisco in the heart of Silicon Valley. And one of the things that, you know, we've realized is that Silicon Valley is not a physical place anymore. It's an idea, and it has gone viral. And that American dream of coming to America, as I did, and pursuing our dreams as entrepreneurs, is something that has spread around the world. And there are millions of foreigners who want to come to this country, who are incredibly talented and want to start companies. And the majority of new jobs in America have been started by foreign-born entrepreneurs. So, you know, a number of years ago, a few of us actually co-founded the Startup Visa movement, which led to the Startup Visa bill. And in the campaign, we did 8 roundtables with the president and brought together 140 entrepreneurs, mostly from Silicon Valley. And we're so impressed with the president's commitment to the idea of the startup visa and the idea of letting many more entrepreneurs come to America and pursue their dreams. So this is an incredible moment in our history, and I am so excited about the legion of people around the world who want to come here and who can actually be a huge net benefit to our economy and our culture and our future. So with that, Cecilia, if I could ask you a question on behalf of those who are watching from around the world with their hopes and dreams in their hearts, what advice do you have for them in terms of how they can actually prepare in anticipation of this historic moment and these ideas that are actually outlined in the bill specifically around the startup visa concepts? What advice do you have for them to prepare for that, specifically to some of the actual outlined items in the policy that was outlined? And what's the timing that they should expect in terms of this actually becoming the law of the land?
Well, thanks so much for your engagement, Shervin, and thank you for really your eloquence about sort of what this means to our economy. You said it yourself, the president is super excited about this piece of the work, as he is about all of it. If you heard him speak on Tuesday, you heard him talk a lot about how, as a country, we're like the center of innovation, and we attract the best and the brightest from all over the world, and it's crazy that we train so much of the best and the brightest from all over the world and then don't make provision for them to stay and start companies here. And they end up starting companies in other parts of the world that create jobs elsewhere, and that ends up being our competition. So he wants to make sure there's room in our immigration system for the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the people who are bringing ideas and energy, who are learning how to use them, who are getting the tools for how to use them at our universities, so that they can stay here and start companies here and create American jobs. So that's a big priority in the president's principles. Two of the big pieces you referenced, one is the startup visa, which would be for entrepreneurs, people with great ideas who are raising capital in the United States and need to be able to come here. They're going to need to be able to demonstrate that they're creating jobs, that they're being successful. But the hope is that we'll create a number of visas that will allow those folks to come, start jobs, innovate, and really get new technologies and new companies going here in the United States. So the best thing that people can be doing to prepare for that is to be prepared to come with ideas, to be prepared to come to create jobs, because that's what we're looking to see happen. And then the second piece has to do with people who are getting advanced degrees in STEM fields, in science, technology, engineering, and math. That the hope is, and I think there is a lot of consensus around this, that we'll create avenues for those folks to be able to stay and work and, again, have the impact of creating jobs and building industries here in the United States. The president is making it clear that immigration reform is part of his economic vision for how we're going to advance as a country, how we're going to create jobs, and how we're going to continue to be first in the world in technology. Immigration reform is a big piece of that, and we really need voices in the Silicon Valley, but really from all over the country, to help us make sure that we're making the case.
Thank you so much, Cecilia.
Thank you.
I want to bring America Ferrera here of Voto Latino, especially considering the historic number of Latinos who turned out to vote in this past November. Go ahead, America.
Thank you, Jose. Hi, Cecilia.
Hi.
So good to see you. Thank you for including me in the conversation. As Jose just mentioned, and as we all know, in the 2012 election, Latinos turned out in record numbers. And through my work with Voto Latino, I met thousands of Americans in the Latino community and not in the Latino community who have stood up and said, we're ready. I'm ready for immigration reform. And now that this is on the table, now that we're in the process, what would you say are ways in which people who are ready to stand up can stay engaged and make sure that their voices are heard? How can they be most effective?
Thank you so much for this question, and thank you for your voice and your presence in this debate. It means so much to so many people. I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is that people in the Latino community, but in all kinds of communities around the country who care about this issue, who care about other issues, felt really empowered by this election, because what we all said to them is, your voice matters. And it's going to matter in our ability to get things done. And they heard that, and they showed up. And now things have started to change as a result. of the logjam that we've been facing on immigration reform for too many years. You can feel it starting to break. You can feel the momentum building. The community did that. People did that. And as a community, people who are interested in this, not just from the Latino community, but from all of the stakeholder communities, have to keep that energy going. That means telling your own story, if it's part of your own story. That means making sure that your neighbors, that the community groups that you're part of, that the PTAs, that you're educating your legislators, that folks understand why this is important. They understand why so much intensity. And frankly, we want them to feel the intensity. It's not going to be enough anymore to just have the debate. We've had the conversation. This is the moment for the result. And again, the more people who are lifting up their voices, calling for that, insisting on that, and explaining why that's so, the more successful we're going to be, and the sooner we're going to get it done.
And so sorry, Jose, can I just ask a follow-up?
Absolutely.
And in terms of keeping the pressure on our elected officials, on our leaders in Congress, is it phone calls? Is it letters? What do you believe keeps the pressure on and heightens the intensity and shows them we're ready for this change?
I think all of that does. I mean, what I've learned from all of my years in Washington is that every sector needs to feel the pressure and needs to feel the intensity. And that means making sure that that a day doesn't go by that this issue doesn't come up, that people, that there is never a moment in which we take our foot off the gas. So it all matters. And I think people should know there is no magic to this. This is a democracy. This is about people lifting up their voices in whatever way works. Participating today matters, and what you'll do tomorrow matters too.
I wanna turn over to Jim here, because you cannot undermine the role of the faith community in this issue, and the important role that they play in facilitating a conversation in our communities. So go ahead, Jim. Oh, Jim, I think you're in mute. You got it? Jim? Okay, I think we're going to try to figure out to come back to Jim after he unmutes himself. Christina, I'm going to go turn it over to you again.
Yes, thanks, Jose. And actually, I wanted to do a follow-up question based on what Cecilia talked about in response to my first question, particularly about the point that Congress has provided the resources for the Department of Homeland Security, right, to remove, as you were saying, Cecilia, those that are removable. And following up on that point, the Migration Policy Institute recently published a report, particularly looking at immigration enforcement. And the report indicated that our country is spending much more on federal immigration enforcement than on all other principal federal law enforcement agencies combined. And it has allocated nearly $187 billion for immigration enforcement since 1986. So that said, one of the concerns that, as we heard the president speak, that came up is, why is the president playing into this false narrative that we're not safe enough, and that enforcement that we have in place, it's not enough, and that we need even more enforcement?
So I think what you hear the president saying is that we have a responsibility to enforce the law. We have to do it wisely and well. But at the end of the day, I think the Migration Policy Institute report is a very important document, because it shows how this debate has escalated, how Congress has escalated the funding, and they make a very clear case that we, as a nation, we are spending more on the immigration enforcement infrastructure than on the rest of the domestic law enforcement infrastructure combined. And as a nation, we have to make a decision about how to use our resources well to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for our buck in terms of law enforcement, not just on immigration, but on the whole domestic panoply of law enforcement issues. Those are important policy decisions. Those are the kinds of things which are going to be decided in this debate. That's in the hands of the Congress of the United States, and they should be listening to people's views on this. So one of the things that's important about this moment on immigration reform is that we're doing it at a time in which the border is as secure as it's been in 40 years, in which outside experts are saying that net migration from Mexico is at zero. We're doing this at a point where there are all kinds of folks demonstrating that this enforcement equation is in a different place than it was 10 years ago. And that should be giving us the room to have a constructive debate on how do we spend our resources, how do we make sure this system works, how do we make sure that the people who come here and work here come legally and are here legally. And as the president said on Tuesday, that employers are playing by the same set of rules and that workers are playing by the same set of rules. That's what we're trying to achieve here.
I'm off mute now, Jose.
Oh, all right. I'm gonna go to you, Jim, right now. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Well, the mute problem is symbolic of how the faith community was mute for too long on some of this, and now they're
See,
speaking up.
it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor. See, it works out. There you go.
Yeah. Well, Cecilia, hello, Cecilia. You've been meeting with us in the faith community for a long time, and I think what you heard from the faith community on this is the need for courage, which is what you're showing now. So I really want to thank you from all of us for the courage the administration is showing on this. As you know, Cecilia, this for us is a matter of faith. When Jesus said, I was a stranger and you welcomed me, this is a conversion issue for many people of faith. Hispanic evangelicals, Hispanic Catholics have been saying this for a long time. Their brothers and sisters, and now Anglo evangelicals have changed their minds too. And that's been a game changer in the politics, because as you know, a lot of people on the other side have to listen to what evangelicals say. So we've been meeting with the Republicans and Democrats for a long time. So two questions. One is, since the role of faith has been such a game changer on this issue of immigration, I'm hoping the president is going to be reaching out to grassroots faith communities in this whole battle, because now I think we've opened the door for that. With 100,000 churches have joined this I'm a Stranger campaign now. So I think the president has an open door there to reach out to faith communities on this. I hope he will. Secondly, my colleagues have asked the question I want to ask again. Given that we're now changing the law, comprehensive immigration reform, there are many people who are now stuck in the system of deportation or of being terminated from their jobs. And my hope and prayer is that that could be halted, that could be stopped, that could have put a hold on it, a moratorium, if you will, on termination, deportations while this battle is going on in the Congress. Is that possible?
So first of all, Jim, you and the faith leaders that are involved in this campaign, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the moral leadership. It's incredibly important, and I think it'll be instrumental in getting us across the finish line. So thank you for that. As I've said on the deportation question, the best mechanism to lift this shadow from over people, we know that people live in fear, and again, we know that it is a crazy thing to be obliged to find 11 million people. I mean, this is something that we know it is not, that's the obligation to find and remove 11 million people is something that the government's not going to achieve. And so that's, in many respects, one of the stronger arguments that we need an immigration reform, that the broken system has created what is an impossible task. DHS is going to do its job, and it's going to do its job well, and it's going to make the best decisions that it can with respect to its strategy for enforcement. But at the end of the day, we need an enforcement system that works. We need a set of policies that work. We need a law that meets our economic objectives, that meets the moral test of who we are as a country, as a nation of laws, as well as a nation of immigrants. That's the balance that we need to strike in our immigration policy. And we haven't reformed the immigration laws in several decades. It's time. It's time to do that, not just for the enforcement system, but also for the speedy reunification of families. There are too many Americans who wait in terrible long lines to reunite with their closest family members. There are long backlogs for family immigration, for employment-sponsored immigration. When the president talks about a comprehensive immigration reform, he's talking about those pieces. There's an enforcement piece of that. There is the pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people living and working here illegally in the United States. But there's also the legal immigration system, where people wait in long lines to reunite with their family members. Employers wait for a long time for employees that they have identified that they want to hire. We have to take care of all of that. They are interlocking pieces. And so what the president put forward on Tuesday are a detailed set of principles for how to manage all of that. And in the end, we have to get all of that done for the system to work.
If I could follow up, that's why we're committed to this so strongly in the faith community. We need a comprehensive immigration reform, a new law. The old laws are broken, we need new ones. I think our prayer, our hope would be that while we're working on that, hopefully for 6 months or for a year, as long as it takes, that more families won't be broken up. More folks who are obeying the law, contributing, wouldn't be deported or lose their jobs. So my hope is that enforcement could take account of how broken the system is, and that we're all trying to fix it now. And there could be some grace, that's a faith term, some grace, some grace during enforcement during this time. And I hope, again, the president will reach out to us in the faith community during this battle that lies ahead, because there's an open door now for him to do that.
Well, and he has been engaged. We've all been engaged, as you know, with leaders in the faith community, with folks at the grassroots level, and that will continue because, as we've said, we need every voice, every pair of hands if we're going to be successful in getting this done. Thanks for your leadership, Jim.
I'm going to turn over to Shervin again with another question.
So I think my focus on the second question is more around what can people in America and Silicon Valley who care about this issue, what can we do to help push this forward? It does feel like a historical moment where this can be a bipartisan effort to pass this in a speedy manner. But is there any advice that you have about what we all can do to help galvanize the support and push this through?
Thank you. That's a great question. You heard the president say on Tuesday that this is, it's not just about politics, it's not just about policy, it's also about people. And you also heard him make a very strong economic case, and particularly folks in Silicon Valley, folks in the business community who care about these issues, can lift up the economic case for doing this, that this is really about our competitiveness as a country. There are, important things that we can do because we're a nation of immigrants and we care about that heritage and we care about what that says about our future. But there's also some just plain calculation about economics here. This is how we're going to create jobs. This is how we're going to make sure that we stay on the cutting edge of technology, that we are at the cutting edge of innovation all across the world, that we, having brought talent from all over the world, the best and the brightest, and the people with the gumption to come and leave everything they know and come to a new place, is what has made us who we are as a nation, and that continues to be true. And so voices from your community, from folks in your sector, can be really instrumental in making it clear this is part of an economic vision and what's going to move us forward. And that is central to this debate. It's central to why we need action. And frankly, we don't need, 10 months of sausage making in the Congress here. We know what needs to get done. We've known for a long time. There was a bipartisan bill that passed the U.S. Senate in 2006. There doesn't need to be a lot of agonizing about what needs to get done here. What there needs to be is a bill and a markup and some votes and a signing ceremony. And let's get this going.
And Cecilia, do you have any thinking in terms of the White House, your goals in terms of what that timing is of passing a bill? When do you want? Is this a 100-day goal? Is it a 60-day goal? What's your?
Well, you heard the president talking about it during the campaign. You heard him talk about it on election night. He talked about it in his very first press conference after being reelected. And what he said was, I intend to lead, and I expect this debate to start immediately after the inauguration. And I think it is pretty exciting that a week after his inauguration, there was a bipartisan agreement in the Senate. Yeah. And he's presented a very detailed set of principles. I mean, this debate has started. But he was also very clear on Tuesday. The fact that there's a bipartisan group talking is great news. And there's been a lot of talking over a lot of years. We need a bill, and we need a bill as quickly as possible. So what he said in a couple of interviews yesterday is that he wants to see this done within 6 months. He wants to make sure that we don't waste a lot of time agonizing over details, because we know what needs to get done in this bill, and we ought to be able to see a bill going through the Senate process, in a matter of weeks. And so part of the role he's going to play in this process is to keep the fire lit and frankly, this is a role that all of you can play, is to keep the fire lit. It's good that there's a conversation, but we don't want to see a long negotiation that produces something at the end of the year. We want a bill moving through the Senate this spring.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to call on America right now for another question.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, no, it's okay.
My second question has to do with the families that have already been separated. And I'm wondering, if the president's immigration reform principles become law, how would we see those families that have already been separated be reunited here in America? Is that something that you can speak to?
It's a hard question because a lot depends on the circumstances of the family and what the reason was for removal of folks. Either were removed by the government or if they departed voluntarily. There are a lot of technical pieces of that need to get sorted out, so it's not going to be one answer for every family. But at the end of the day, it's incredibly important to the president, and you heard him say it on Tuesday, that it be clear to the 11 million people that we're talking about here that there's a path to citizenship at the end of this. It's going to be, a process that requires people to pay taxes and learn English and pay a fine and go through a process in order to legalize. But at the end of that process, they become legal permanent residents who are eligible to become U.S. citizens. And for U.S. citizens, the whole legal immigration system is available for people to reunite with their families. So that's why you heard the president say it has to be clear from the outset that citizenship is a part of this equation, and he means it.
I'm going to turn over to Jim again here for a second question.
Sure. I'm really glad to hear every time I hear you say the path to citizenship is so central. And I'm also glad that we've got Republicans saying that too, and Democrats. So that's critical for us in the faith community. But I know there's going to be a how and when and a sequencing of that. Personally, I love the idea of the dreamers, the young undocumented, being able to move quickly because they've been here for so long and they're so much a part of our life. Jose and all of you that are part of that. So I hope you could do that quickly. I'm also, though, wanting to make sure that there's a lot of talk about the high-end immigrants, the high-tech, the masters and PhD people who get their green cards when they graduate. I'm concerned about the farm workers, those who are at the low end of the society, but who literally make our food possible, who make our life possible. I've met people who have been here for 20, 30 years. This is their life, this is their home, and I would hope that the people at the low end of our social structure, they're prioritized too, not just those at the high educated end. So what about undocumented people who are doing the hard jobs that keep us together every day, often are not even spoken to, looked past from a Christian point of view? They're as important as the high-end people. So what about them, and what about farm workers in particular?
Of course. So the legalization process, the pathway to citizenship that the president is proposing, doesn't distinguish between folks who are farm workers and folks who are engineers. The point is that you're eligible on the basis of being here, having complied with the law, not having committed serious crimes, and then moving forward, you pay taxes, you learn English, you pay a fine, you go through that process, and you become a legal permanent resident. One important piece of that is that you go to the back of the line behind people who are waiting in the legal immigration system for visas. But a very important thing that is part of the president's principle is that we take steps to make sure to eliminate that backlog. So it's not just a question of folks getting in the back of the existing line, which is years and sometimes decades long, but that in fact we take steps to clear out that backlog so that the folks waiting in line for legal immigrant visas get processed expeditiously, and the folks who are legalizing do as well. So that's a very, very important piece of what's in the president's proposal. And then, as you said, he also proposes for dreamers who serve in the military or who go to college that they would have an expedited path.
I wanted to follow up on this question because
actually, I'm sorry, guys. Just for everybody's knowledge, this is going to be the last question, unfortunately, of the chat. So go ahead, Cristina.
Oh. Sorry, thanks. I
Okay.
mean, my question is twofold. One, I just wanted to follow up on the last question, given that this is not only about dreamers. I mean, you know, we are part of families, and we are very concerned about our loved ones, our parents, and the way that particularly the Senate has come up with a framework where it's really unclear how this path to citizenship will look like. And so my question to the president, particularly because of the principles and the vision that he has laid out, is, you know, how long does a president think is too long for immigrants or parents who already contributed so much to this country to become citizens? Because right now we have a really backlogged, and given what the Senate has really, you know, shared in terms of the framework, it's really unclear whether this path could take 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And so I would really be interested in knowing what's the commitment from the president on this.
So this is why I think it's important. Two things are important. One is that there's a lot of agreement between the architecture that the Senate has put forward and the architecture that the president has put forward. And that's a good thing because it shows that there's really an opportunity to get this done. I think the other thing that's important is that that in the administration, we've thought this through in a lot of detail over a lot of years. And so the principles that the president put forward are really quite detailed. And as he said on Tuesday, he hopes that they provide some guidance to the folks in the Senate who are drafting so that they don't have to rethink questions that we have already thought through. We know how to process that backlog so that it doesn't take decades and decades for people to then get to the front of the line to legalize. We've thought through how to do that. We've thought through how to do it in a reasonable amount of time. And it is our hope that that will provide some useful information to the Senate to include in their proposals. So the whole point here is we got to get these things locked down into legislative language quickly. We need to get this debate going so that it's clear to everybody what we're talking about, because you'll have the legislative language in front of you. And what the president said on Tuesday is we'll help facilitate, we'll help provide information to the Senate process. We'll give them the space to have their deliberations. But if that process gets bogged down, you heard the president say very clearly, he'll present his own bill and ask the Senate to vote on it. We have to get this done, and the president's going to stay focused on getting to an outcome.
As a follow-up to that, I mean, as a gay American who's also undocumented and gay, I just have to ask this question. What is the president going to make sure, how will the president make sure that protection is going to be given to same-sex binational couples under the legislation?
Well, that's in his principles. He made it clear on Tuesday. There's a piece of legislation called UAFA. I forget what the letters.
Yes, Uniting American Families Act, I think.
Thank you. So essentially, the provisions of that bill are reflected in the president's principles. It is his hope that that will be part of the outcome that we see. I think it's fair to say, well, we can expect a debate on that when this legislation reaches the Senate floor, and we have to be ready for that debate. But the president's views on this issue are very well known. And family reunification is an important part of the principles. It's what's made our immigration law strong. It's what's made it consistent with our national values. And the reunification of families has to be an important principle that we preserve as we reform our immigration system.
So before we end this, I actually have to provide Cecilia with her closing remarks here, as we can't believe 35 minutes just went really quickly. But Cecilia, I just want to make sure that you get an opportunity to address, you know, people who are really listening to what you have to say and the leadership that you've taken there in terms of what's happening with people's lives every day.
Well,
so
thank you. Thank you so much, Jose, and thank you to America and Cristina and Jim and Shervin for your participation. This is a really important moment. We have this incredible opportunity. You can feel things starting to shift in this debate. And a lot of us have been working on this a long time, each of you in your own way is a leader in this debate. And there are many, many more, not just leaders of institutions or sectors, but people who are leaders because they're individuals with a story to tell. And you should never underestimate the strength and the power of that story in helping shift the country. It already has. It's what got us to the point where we have a bipartisan group in the Senate saying yes to immigration reform. And it's what's going to get us to the point where that yes becomes a bill that gets voted on and that the president can sign. We have an extraordinary sense of urgency here at the White House. The president, I hope you heard on Tuesday, his sense of urgency around this. And the most important thing that we can do is work together to get this done and to make sure that it is as consistent as possible with our values as a country, as a nation of laws, as a nation of immigrants, as a nation that believes in economic growth and job creation, as a nation that believes in keeping families together. All of those are principles we have to take into this debate with great energy and drive and passion. And I so appreciate what you all bring to this. And I look forward to getting this done together.
Well, I really want to thank Cecilia, America, Cristina, Shervin, and Jim. And I just hope that as we have this very necessary conversation on reform, that we do not forget that every day families are getting torn apart and people are getting deported. And we have to keep that in mind. And we thank everybody for the work that they do. And we really hope that in the next few months, we finally solve this issue. Thanks to everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Jose.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.